What happened that gray Tuesday morning began as nothing more than a small moment on a downtown sidewalk, the kind of moment people rush past without noticing. Yet it grew into one of the most life-altering events the city had ever whispered about, and it all started when a tired, homeless black mother named Anaya, clutching her thin jacket against the cold and carrying her 5-year-old son Malik on her hip, stepped up to the faded glass door of Crumbletown Bakery and quietly asked the teenage cashier, "Do you have any expired pastries for my son?" A question spoken so softly it nearly dissolved into the hum of traffic, yet loud enough to be heard by a man sitting in a sleek black luxury SUV just across the street. A man whose fortune had been built not on compassion but on precision, calculation, and the ruthless instinct to survive in boardrooms where kindness was often mistaken for weakness. His name was Donovan Harlow, a multimillionaire tech investor known for buying companies the way others bought coffee. And as he glanced up from his phone and saw Anaya standing there, her posture proud but exhausted, he felt an unfamiliar twinge in his chest, though he quickly brushed it off as nothing more than indigestion. The kind he got from skipping breakfast again because he'd spent another night obsessing over market reports. Meanwhile, inside the bakery, the teenage cashier named Lila hesitated because technically expired pastries could be thrown out or donated, but company policy said not to hand them out directly. And she was new and afraid of losing her job, so she fiddled with her apron strings before stammering. I'm not supposed to. Let me check with my manager." And she rushed into the back, leaving Anaya standing with Malik, who was rubbing his eyes and whispering, "Mommy, I'm hungry," in that small voice that stabbed her heart with guilt, even though she had done everything humanly possible to keep him safe since life unraveled 8 months ago, when the factory where she worked shut down without warning, leaving her without income, without childcare, and eventually without a home when the rent skyrocketed. She had filled out applications everywhere, but every rejection email chipped away at her hope until she found herself on the streets, not broken but deeply bruised by the world's indifference, and still she refused to give up. Every morning telling Malik that better days were coming even when she didn't believe it herself. Outside, Donovan kept watching, unable to tear his eyes away as he recalled another moment decades earlier when he had stood with his own mother outside a bakery. But back then he was a scrawny boy with torn shoes and a mother battling an addiction that swallowed every dollar they ever had. And in that memory he stood hopelessly as his mother screamed at the baker for refusing to give them day-old bread, a scene that ended with police intervention and a night spent in a shelter where he realized that if he wanted to survive he had to claw his way up alone. And from that night forward he hardened himself, determined never to depend on anyone again, which was why he built walls so high that relationships suffocated before they began, and why now, seeing a mother gently asking instead of screaming, stirred a long-buried ache he hadn't felt since childhood. While Donovan was lost in his memories, the bakery manager, a stern woman named Evelyn, came out front and told Anaya, "We don't give out expired pastries directly. You can check the shelter on Broad Avenue. They collect our leftovers every night." Which was technically true but unhelpful because Broad Avenue was a 2-hour walk and Malik had a fever last night, and Anaya simply nodded, not angry, just defeated, whispering, "Thank you anyway," as she turned to leave, adjusting her son's weight on her hip, and it was then that Donovan acted without thinking, slamming his car door and striding across the street with a sudden urgency that startled even him. He stopped in front of Anaya and said, "Excuse me, please wait," and when she turned to face him cautiously, he realized he had no idea what he planned to say, so the words spilled out clumsily, "Let me buy you whatever you want in there," and he pointed at the bakery, expecting her to gratefully accept, but instead she straightened her shoulders and said, "I'm not asking for charity. I just didn't want food to go to waste." And her dignity stunned him, because he was used to people begging, manipulating, or flattering him, but never someone refusing help out of pride, so he softened his tone, saying, "I understand, but I'd still like to help. Not charity, just kindness. And something in her and Malik. Not just with money, but with legal help, with safe housing, with anything they needed." And he immediately hired security to ensure Terrell couldn't get near them, which only escalated things because Terrell retaliated by breaking into Donovan's SUV one night, leaving a note that said, "Stay away from my family," which made Donovan realize this was no longer just an act of kindness. It had become a responsibility he felt deep in his bones. As the days passed, Anaya slowly began trusting him, seeing that his efforts were not performative but genuine, and he found himself drawn to her resilience, her quiet humor, and the way she always put Malik first even when she was exhausted. He visited them at the motel with groceries, toys, and job applications for positions he knew she'd excel at, but he never pressured her, only encouraged gently. One evening, Malik asked Donovan to read him a bedtime story, and as Donovan sat on the motel floor reading about dragons and heroes, he felt something shift inside him, a warmth he had shut out since childhood, and Anaya noticed the softness in his expression, which made her heart ache in a way she wasn't ready to name. Just when everything seemed to be stabilizing, a new twist hit. Child Protective Services received an anonymous report claiming Anaya was endangering Malik by involving him in viral publicity stunts, a lie clearly planted by someone with malicious intent. Likely Terrell, and CPS officers arrived for an evaluation, threatening to separate mother and son unless she could prove she had stable housing and income. She called Donovan sobbing, and he rushed over immediately, arguing fiercely on her behalf, providing documentation of the motel arrangement, the job applications, and even offering his attorneys to mediate. But the officers gave her only 10 days to secure permanent housing, which seemed impossible, except Donovan refused to let her lose Malik. So he did the only thing he could think of. He offered her a rent-free apartment in a building he owned, not as charity but as a transitional living arrangement legally framed to satisfy CPS requirements. And though she resisted accepting something so big, she knew she needed it to keep Malik, so she agreed, on the condition that she would pay rent once she found a job. During those 10 days, Donovan supported her through interviews, coached her through preparation, and even cared for Malik during appointments. But the biggest twist came. On the final day when CPS returned and, after reviewing her progress and visiting the new apartment, declared that Malik could remain with her, but also asked pointedly about Donovan's role, implying suspicion about why a millionaire would be so involved. Anaya defended him passionately, saying he had helped without expectation and had never crossed boundaries, and Donovan stepped back respectfully, sensing her pride. CPS closed the case, and for the first time in months, Anaya felt hope. Meanwhile, Donovan watched her begin working at an administrative job he helped her find, watched Malik enroll in a local preschool, and found himself visiting less because he didn't want to overwhelm her. Yet each time he pulled away he felt a strange emptiness he couldn't quite name. The final twist came 2 months later when Terrell resurfaced with a dangerous plan. He attempted to kidnap Malik from preschool, convinced Anaya had access to Donovan's wealth and owed him a share. But Donovan, who had anticipated something like this, had already hired private security stationed discreetly near the school, and they intervened immediately, leading to Terrell's arrest. Shaken but safe, Anaya went to Donovan's office that evening with Malik, and as she stood in front of him, she realized she no longer feared asking for help because he had never used her vulnerability against her, and Donovan realized he no longer wanted to distance himself because he cared for them more deeply than he had admitted. And in that quiet moment, with Malik napping on a couch nearby, Anaya said, "You changed our lives." But Donovan shook his head and replied, "You changed mine first." Because compassion had returned him to the boy he once was and healed a part of him money never could. And though neither spoke the word love, something unspoken but powerful settled between them, a promise of a future built not on charity or desperation but on mutual respect, courage, and a chance encounter that proved a single moment of kindness could rewrite entire destinies. Charity, just kindness. And something in his voice must have reached her because after a long breath she nodded and followed him inside, where he bought not one pastry but an entire box of fresh goods, plus warm sandwiches, juice, and even a small hot chocolate for Malik, who sipped it with the delighted seriousness of a child who rarely received treats. Anaya thanked him gently, still wary, and Donovan surprised himself by asking, "Have you eaten today?" Which led to him buying her breakfast, too, though he noticed she ate slowly, as if not used to eating in front of others, and as they sat at a corner table, a strange quiet understanding grew between them, with Donovan asking polite questions and Anaya answering cautiously but honestly, explaining her situation without self-pity, just fact, and when he asked, "Do you have anywhere safe to stay?" Her eyes dimmed and she shook her head, admitting they sometimes slept behind the library because it was well lit and Malik liked, pretending the stars peeking through the branches were constellations on a storybook map. Hearing this made Donovan's stomach twist, and before he could stop himself he blurted out, well, I can help you with something more stable. But Anaya immediately said, no thank you, because experience had taught her that offers from strangers often came with hidden costs, and besides, she didn't want her son to be beholden to anyone. Donovan respected her reluctance, yet something inside him insisted he couldn't walk away now. Not when fate had placed this exact mother and child in front of him. Not when he could practically see his younger self sitting there in Malik's hopeful eyes. And so he asked for permission to give her a prepaid grocery card instead. Framed not as a gift but as something a foundation of his supported. Though this was a lie because he didn't donate to charities. But she didn't know that, and she finally accepted because it sounded formal and safe. Meanwhile, across the bakery, a middle-aged man filmed the exchange on his phone, thinking he'd caught a feel-good moment for social media, and he posted it instantly with the caption "Millionaire helps homeless mom, faith in humanity restored," which none of them knew about yet, but that post would become one of the biggest complications of the entire ordeal. After breakfast, Donovan walked outside with Anaya and Malik, intending to offer them a ride to the library or even a motel, but before he could speak, a tall, tense man in a hoodie approached, shouting, "Anaya, where you been? I've been looking everywhere." And the shock on her face told Donovan everything. This man was trouble, and her instinctive step backward confirmed it. The man, whose name was Terrell, insisted he was Malik's father, though he had never paid a single dime of child support nor visited regularly, and he launched into accusations, saying she was turning Malik against him and hanging out with rich dudes. And Donovan, unused to street confrontations, felt suddenly protective but unsure how to intervene, yet Anaya handled it with fierce calm, saying, "You need to go. You're scaring Malik." But Terrell kept shouting until a passing officer approached, asking if everyone was okay. Before they could answer, Terrell bolted, disappearing down an alley, leaving Anaya trembling but trying to hide it from her son. Donovan suggested again that he could help her find temporary shelter, and this time she hesitated, then whispered, "Maybe just for tonight," because the encounter with Terrell meant the library wasn't safe anymore. Donovan drove them to a small, discreet motel on the quieter side of town, paid for a week up front, and handed her the room key, expecting nothing in return. But she surprised him by placing her hand over his and saying softly, "You didn't have to do this. Thank you, truly." And it was the sincerity in her eyes that undid him. He drove home thinking about her all night, feeling switched on in a way money had never made him feel. But the next morning everything exploded when the viral video hit 1 million views and reporters camped outside his office, spinning the story into one of redemption, heroism, philanthropy, and political meaning he never intended, and worst of all, strangers online began trying to track down Anaya, calling her the homeless mom from the video, which terrified her because she didn't want pity or exposure, and because Terrell, having seen the video, now believed she had access to money and began texting threats saying she owed him. So she called Donovan in tears, begging him to make the video go away, but he couldn't, because nothing disappears once the internet claims it. However, he promised her he would protect C.